My name is Sophia Grant, and I lead as chief surgeon for an international medical relief organization. But to my family, I've always been little more than a restless drifter in scrubs. They never acknowledged a daughter who healed in crisis zones or a sister who coordinated life-saving efforts across continents. They just perceived the one who wouldn't anchor down, who selected crises over celebrations and field hospitals over family functions. I hadn't communicated with my mother or sister in nearly 13 years. Not since the remembrance. Not since they sidelined me in my medical whites while they orchestrated portraits by Dad's memorial plaque, as if it were a social affair. I'd ceased efforts after that. No correspondences, no reunions, just the mutual hush we all upheld. Then, 4 weeks prior, a refined invitation materialized on my workstation at the organization's headquarters in Atlanta, a velvety beige envelope with my name scripted fully. Sophia Grant. No title, no prefix, just the stark label they utilized to diminish me. The sender's address was Mom's residence in Boston, and the occasion. My younger sister Nora's wedding. She was wedding a man named Liam Foster. That name arrested me. Dr. Liam Foster, a physician I'd triaged during a catastrophic earthquake response in Haiti in 2019. I'd stabilized his team in a collapsing clinic, performing emergency procedures under flickering generators with aftershocks rumbling and debris clouding the air. I still bear the nerve damage in my hand from the chaos. I regarded the envelope for what seemed eternities. My coordinator assumed it was spam. The staff in my suite lapsed into quiet, but it wasn't the card that struck profoundly. It was the jotted annotation inside, in Mom's elegant cursive. Proceed appropriately. No salutation, no endearment, just an advisory, as if I posed a hazard to their exhibition. I omitted confirmation. No outreach. I merely scheduled a standard flight and ensured my arrival remained discreet. I didn't attend for commendations. I didn't seek mending. I attended to exist authentically. Not in taffeta. Not with contrived delight. As the woman they'd repudiated. The kin they'd derided. The healer they'd disregarded. What I hadn't foreseen was the groom addressing the gathering, unveiling my expertise before the speeches concluded. And when he did, when he hailed me by designation amid 180 witnesses and detailed our shared crisis, Nora's equilibrium shattered. That marked the cessation of their contempt. That was when they confronted who I'd genuinely evolved into. The matrimonial card lingered on my desk for 6 days before I revisited it. There was a purposeful sharpness to how they'd inscribed my name, Sophia Grant. No chief surgeon, no nod to my credentials, like a deliberate excision from our heritage. Not even a "we'd cherish your presence or unite with us." Just Mom's concise addendum. Proceed appropriately. Her perennial phrase for silencing me, for assuring I wouldn't rupture the veneer. My office at the Relief HQ in Atlanta was tranquil that afternoon. The directors had dispersed for field briefings. I stood by the casement, overlooking the training grounds where volunteers practiced triage drills. My surgical kit rested in the corner, sterilized and ready, an emblem of countless emergencies. The ambient hum of air conditioning whispered behind me. That's when Director Ellis knocked 2 crisp raps, then entered unbidden. She never awaited formalities. She'd mentored me through enough disasters to sense my disquiet. She noticed the envelope at once. Naturally, intel had circulated. Attending? She inquired, tone balanced. Undecided. She occupied a chair, legs intersected, fingers interlaced. Your sister? A nod. To Foster? Another. Ellis exhaled appreciatively. The Haiti quake 2019. You headed the mobile OR, got his med team functional when the aftershocks hit. Hand took a hit from falling beams. Impressive response. My reply was even. Nerves still twinge sometimes. The interval between us was unstrained. It was the forged link of shared crises, where implications supplanted verbiage. Seriously contemplating? She pressed gently. I averted her gaze, uncertain what they desire. Pardon, perhaps, or my subdued attendance. She leaned ahead. Deny them that. Participate on your conditions. You've secured the privilege to stand resolute without apology. I absorbed her counsel, then inclined my head. That evening, I reserved a commercial flight to Boston Logan under a pseudonym. Business casual for the trip. Informed no one, not my driver, not personnel, not Ellis. The aircraft was sparse, cabins resonant. I selected an aisle, upgraded to vacant the adjacent. The attendant spotted my relief badge on my lanyard and offered tea. I chose herbal, calming. Midway over the Appalachians, I closed my eyes, not for repose, but to center. This wasn't a disaster zone, but family a domain without protocols. We descended at dawn. Logan was efficient. Sterile. My credentials hastened customs. No luggage. Essentials in a carry-on. Scrubs folded neatly. Outside, Boston's morning mist enveloped me harbor brine in the breeze, gulls circling above as if deriding terrestrial woes. I summoned a rideshare. No escort, no protocol. Just the thoroughfare I'd once commuted as a med student, when I mistook Mom's aloofness for weariness rather than strategy. Reaching her brownstone in Back Bay, I hesitated at the steps. Fresh blooms in planters, brass knocker gleaming, all pristine, a homage to perfection. The door parted to Eleanor Grant in tailored slacks and a silk blouse costing more than my field pack. Her coiffure was impeccable. She appraised me like a triage nurse. You received it then, she observed. I did. I trust you've brought fitting garb. Scrubs packed. Her lips pursed. Don't overshadow, Sophia. This is Nora's occasion. I met her eyes levelly. Why invite the family wanderer? She stepped aside wordlessly, granting ingress. The dynamic had initiated. The brownstone remained unaltered. Lavender infusers on every surface. Crystal sconce in the entry with no flicker. Even the quiet seemed rehearsed, like a ward awaiting rounds. Nora wasn't present upon arrival mercifully. Eleanor led me to the spare with impersonal efficiency. Understated event, she remarked. Unlocking. Rehearsal tomorrow evening. Ceremony following day. Arrive attired and inconspicuous beforehand. No family procession? I queried mildly. She halted. You're not in the bridal party. Predictably. The room was flawless neutral palettes, crisp linens, a single orchid like an obligatory olive branch. I placed my carry-on, hung the scrubs sheathed, skipped unpacking. Brief sojourn. That night, the rehearsal unfolded at an upscale bistro overlooking the Charles River, the city lights reflecting like diagnostic scans on water. The locale exuded polish. Velvet booths, scripted menus, my card S. Grant no flourish at the periphery near the kitchen pass, where steam wafts and plate clatters interrupted. I settled, composed. The space hummed with genteel discourse. Mom orchestrated like a lead surgeon, adjusting stems and stemware. Nora arrived stylishly tardy, in pearl sheath, radiating as if absorbing the ambient glow. She spared me a passing glance before embracing our cousin with exaggerated joy, her giggle piercing. Toasts with Chardonnay. To Bonds, one guest proclaimed. To Nora and Liam, another echoed. To renewals, Eleanor intoned, eyes skimming past me. No welcome for Sophia, no inquiries about my last decade in relief zones. The only spark, a retired physician at Eleanor's table. He peered my way. You seem known, he murmured. Eleanor interjected smoothly. Sophia's in volunteer coordination now. Overseas gigs. Constant movement. Coordination? Nora smirked. She hands out bandages in tents. We think. Snickers rippled. My focus shifted to the butter knife gleaming. Balanced. I held silence, but the physician's expression shifted. Haiti Quake 2019? The field hospital under rubble? I confirmed. Yes, ma'am. He began more, but Eleanor diverted. Now, about the pairings. I sipped water, fresh and cool. In the contrived elegance, a fracture emerged. Recollection stirred. The wedding morning arrived, shrouded in Boston's unrelenting summer humidity. The air thick and heavy as it pressed against the city like a damp compress over a wound. Nora had selected the historic chapel in Beacon Hill for its enduring, picturesque, allure red brick walls that had withstood centuries of New England winters, wrought iron lanterns flanking the entrance like steadfast guardians, and stained glass windows that diffused the hazy sunlight into a kaleidoscope of soft, ethereal colors across the interior. It was a venue straight from a bridal magazine, everything meticulously aligned in its place, except for me. I had complied with the instructions, arriving well before the guests began to trickle in, Eleanor's words looping in my head like a pre-op checklist. Be unobtrusive. Integrate seamlessly. No bold statements. Yet I had chosen to wear my field scrubs anyway, not to incite confrontation, but because every faded stain, every reinforced seam, represented a hard-fought battle in remote clinics and disaster zones. They weren't just fabric. They were my armor, earned through sleepless nights suturing under generator lights and triaging in the midst of chaos. As I stepped into the foyer, the space was already alive with the scent of fresh-cut roses and polished oak, the floral displays arranged like surgical trays along the walls, precise, abundant, ready for deployment. The seating chart was presented on an antique easel, names etched in gold leaf on luxurious cardstock, assignments doled out like exclusive invitations to a gala. I examined it carefully, running my finger down the list once, then again for verification: no Sophia Grant, no Dr. Grant among the front-row family seats. Then I found it, hastily added in pen at the bottom edge, like an afterthought in a patient's chart. Pew 14. Side aisle. I nearly let out a quiet laugh at how fitting it was Eleanor's style through and through, consigning the issue to the margins where it couldn't complicate the primary procedure. She glided past shortly after, a picture of composed elegance in her lace ensemble, exchanging air kisses with early arrivals. Pew 14 for you, she said in passing, her voice smooth but edged, like a scalpel's blade. I didn't reply, simply moving into the sanctuary and taking my designated spot at the rear, where the humidity seemed to amplify the faint echo of footsteps and murmurs. The pews filled steadily, guests arriving in waves like patients to a clinic. Soft conversations mingling with the rustle of silk and linen, the subtle waft of high-end fragrances, the sparkle of diamonds catching the filtered light. Bridesmaids in coordinated pastels fluttered about, adjusting veils and bouquets, while photographers captured spontaneous moments that were rehearsed to perfection. Liam positioned himself at the chancel, impeccable in his tailored suit, though his stance betrayed the doctor in him, alert and composed, eyes scanning the room as if assessing vital signs. Our gazes crossed briefly as he adjusted his cufflinks. There was a momentary glint recognition, perhaps a flash of the gratitude from that harrowing night in Haiti, but it dissolved swiftly, overtaken by the ceremony's momentum. Nora's procession was nothing short of dramatic, her train flowing down the aisle like a white ribbon of hope, the organ music building to a crescendo that filled the chapel with resonant chords. The congregation stood in unison, a chorus of admiring sighs, and she shimmered in the hazy glow, every bit the flawless bride. Me? I stayed seated, a lone observer in the back, invisible in the swell of admiration. When the officiant summoned immediate family to the front for a unity prayer, a ritual of lighting candles to symbolize intertwined lives, I rose instinctively, my scrubs whispering against the pew. The call to immediate family stirred something primal, a reflex honed from team huddles in crisis zones where collaboration meant survival. But before I could advance even a step, Eleanor's hand grazed my arm, gentle yet insistent, like applying pressure to a bleed. "This isn't your highlight," she whispered, her tone laced with that faux maternal concern that barely concealed the directive. Almost compassionate, but not quite. I held her gaze for a second, then shifted to the altar where Nora knelt beside Liam, the man whose crushed leg I'd stabilized in Hades' rubble back in 2019, improvising a tourniquet from debris while aftershocks threatened to bury us all, my hand trembling from nerve compression but steady enough to save him. The memory flooded back uninvited, the ground quaking, the clinic's walls crumbling, pulling survivors from the wreckage with dust choking my lungs and blood staining my gloves. Success had its toll, persistent tingling in my fingers. A colleague lost to infection, but family never probed those sacrifices. They dwelled on the missed milestones, the selfish absences from holidays and graduations. I lowered myself back into the pew without protest, the prayer continuing as if I were a phantom, unseen and unconsulted. The reception transitioned to the adjacent courtyard, an oasis of flagstone paths and blooming hydrangeas under Boston's lingering humidity, canopies strung like temporary shelters to ward off any stray rain. My table was nestled behind a decorative hedge near the catering entrance, where the sizzle of grills and clatter of trays provided a constant backdrop. The place card read S. Grant in fine print, the stemware subtly mismatched from the crystal at the head tables, a minor but pointed discrepancy. The waiter overlooked my flute during the first champagne pour, consulting his tablet before shaking his head. "Non-alcohol list," he said briskly. I didn't amend it. Instead, I claimed a glass from a nearby station, filling it with sparkling water to keep my mind sharp amid the revelry. Across the courtyard, Nora spun and preened for the cameras, her laughter ringing like a clear bell. Liam by her side with a hand gently on her waist, a touch of support and claim. Neither looked my way, but my instincts, sharpened from reading symptoms in chaotic ERs, sensed an impending turn, the humidity charged with unspoken pressures. The microphone incident struck like a sudden hemorrhage under the soft illumination of chandeliers, the humidity now thickening into evening as Nora claimed the courtyard's center. She balanced a flute in one hand, the mic in the other, her gown draping elegantly with each motion, dominating the space as if it were her operating theater. To timeless love, she purred, voice tuned for enchantment, practiced flawlessly. To family, to unwavering support. She paused theatrically, then turned her eyes to my hidden table. Even my older sister turned up, from whatever makeshift clinic she's patching up these days, still overseeing those essential bandages, I guess. Chuckles sprinkled the crowd like scattered drops, light but building. Nora's smile expanded, thriving on the vibe. A cheer to the dedicated wanderer among us, the one who keeps the world taped together. The mirth intensified, heartier now, though some guests fidgeted uneasily, their glances darting. But no halt came. Then Eleanor added her cut, voice sharp and incisive like a lancet. "She may be our family's disgrace, but at least she's on schedule." That sparked the full outburst, the courtyard leaning into amusement as talks ceased abruptly, glasses poised in air. I stood gradually, not in panic, not agitated like a novice under fire, but purposefully, like advancing to a critical incision. The change was tangible, heads swiveled, the laughter fading unevenly. Nora angled her head, her look a blend of feigned naivety and defiance. "Oh, it's just humor, Sophia. Relax, you've always been so intense and unyielding." Before I could respond, Liam acted. He stepped ahead with the calculated calm of a surgeon in an ER, maneuvering through the array of tables and astonished guests without rush or doubt. Cameras swung, flashes bursting like strobe lights in a storm. Breaths were suspended as he arrived at my location and stopped one calculated step distant. Then, with the formality ingrained in every medical professional, he bowed deeply not to a relative, not to a simple attendee, but to a peer and savior. "Doctor," he pronounced, voice clear and firm across the courtyard. "Please excuse my bride's misapprehension." He addressed the assembly, tone drawing focus. "This is Dr. Sophia Grant, my chief surgeon during the Haiti earthquake." She didn't just assist. She led the field team that extracted and treated us from the debris, saving my life and my colleagues. Inhalations swept the crowd, audible and substantial, like the collective gasp before a code blue. The reception's orchestrated grace disintegrated then, the humidity seeming to densify with the revelation's gravity. Nora's hand quivered noticeably. The microphone escaped her grasp, hitting the stone with a muted, resounding clunk that marked the quiet. She sank onto a nearby bench, her face void of hue, the bridal veil drooping as if defeated. Eleanor stood immobilized nearby, her lips parting and sealing soundlessly, eventually whispering my name that traveled no farther than her breath. And me? I remained steady. Unflinching years of crisis management had schooled me to maintain composure when all else faltered. The echoes from crises persisted in that instant, reaching back to my enlistment in relief work at 22, fresh from residency in Boston, propelled by a vocation that family occasions never ignited. Eleanor had dismissed it as a transient whim, a revolt against her blueprint marriages to stable professionals, children in private academies, comfortable existences in affluent neighborhoods like Back Bay. Nora, the eternal favorite, had mimicked her with mocking comments about Band-Aid distributor while she pursued publicity and sponsorships. Dad, before his abrupt passing, had been my silent advocate, passing aid reports under the table during those strained dinners, his eyes sparkling with unspoken pride. His remembrance 13 years ago had been the breaking point. Me, in medical whites, pushed to the edges as they arranged photos by the plaque like it was a networking event. No acknowledgement of my promotion to lead coordinator or the responses that had defined me. Just Eleanor's curt directive. Don't make this about you. That silence had stretched into over a decade of distance, broken only by this invitation, a summons wrapped in warning. Now, as the reception hesitantly resumed, with waitstaff circulating trays that few sampled and the quartet launching a subdued melody, those echoes started to fade. Liam dropped his bow but stayed beside me, a reliable presence amid the buzz. I should have disclosed sooner, he confessed quietly, his eyes surveying the crowd as if monitoring vitals. But some traumas are better compartmentalized until they're not. I nodded subtly. Timing is critical in medicine. And in life, guests approached in small groups, their prior amusement replaced by intrigue and admiration handshakes from fellow medics, questions about Haiti that I answered with controlled detail, skirting sensitive cases. One elderly woman, a retired pediatrician with a stethoscope charm on her necklace, clasped my arm. My daughter worked in refugee camps, she shared. Lost a colleague to malaria. Leaders like you. They give hope. Her words hit like a vital sign stabilizing, replenishing something I'd long considered depleted. Eleanor tried to reclaim the narrative, moving with renewed energy, but her attempts were futile. Guests' focus had shifted. The courtyard's mood irrevocably changed. Nora, regaining her color with her bridesmaid's help, kept her distance, her laughter now strained and sporadic. As evening deepened, the humidity yielding to a cooler breeze, I retreated to the courtyard's edge, near a fountain where water flowed in calming rhythms. Reflections shimmered on the surface, replaying the night's disorder. Nora's taunts like uncontrolled bleeding, Liam's bow, the hemostat, the wave of gasps, the stabilization. It wasn't vindication I felt, but a rebalancing, a shift where the crises' echoes no longer dominated as profoundly. 4 months later, speaking at a panel under the CDC's expansive atrium in Atlanta, I channeled that shift into broader action. Dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, no badges displayed, I held the podium and voiced truths I'd carried unspoken for too long. We have protocols for infectious outbreaks, I began, my voice carrying to the room of researchers, aid workers, and policymakers. For pandemics, for natural disasters, but what about the injuries from our own support systems? Not from viruses or quakes, but from family dismissals that cut deeper than any scalpel. The audience leaned in, a sea of nodding heads. I launched the Lifeline Alliance, a national network for relief workers undermined at home counseling for broken trust, programs to rebuild strained relationships, resources to fight isolation from siblings, partners, parents. Sometimes the worst wound is the erosion of backing, I stressed. We can't ignore those as secondary. I named no names Nora's ridicule, Eleanor's additions, but the media linked it from wedding leaks, headlines shouting relief surgeons family clash sparks support initiative. I let it spread. a wave carrying the message onward. Retirement came smoothly afterward, no grand send-offs, just a quiet handover and move to a cabin in Vermont's Berkshires, where rolling hills whispered like old colleagues. Solitude brought healing, mornings drafting medical diagrams in storms, afternoons hiking paths that echoed strategic assessments, planned steps, views from ridges like surveying a field hospital, no walls with certificates. Instead, an easel by the window, overlooking valleys that mirrored endless possibilities. Occasional visitors, neighbors, volunteers asked about my past over herbal tea. "True, you're a surgeon?" one inquired, eyes wide. I smiled. "Chief surgeon, yes. But more importantly, I learned to stand firm amid upheaval." Sharing selectively, I emphasized resilience. The responses that tested, the families that failed, the equity found in quiet assertion. Back in Boston, echoes reached me through indirect paths. Eleanor's philanthropy now including aid worker causes, Nora's online presence subdued, hinting at personal evolution. No direct contact, but the change was evident. The pivoting flow had reshaped the landscape, leaving me on steadier ground. They held back their words, not out of composure, but because voicing anything now would lock in their offenses, a confession carved into the evening's lingering humidity like a permanent scar on fragile tissue. I kept my stance with the same unwavering poise I'd held during marathon surgeries in sweltering tents, where precision meant the difference between life and loss, and hesitation wasn't an option. Liam stayed by my side, his posture as steady as in post-op recovery, a doctor's resilience cutting through this familial disarray. The courtyard's vibe needed no boosting. It soaked into every person, every blooming hydrangea, every forgotten canapé on the silver trays. Then the follow-on surge arrived. It began from a front-row table near the jazz ensemble. An older woman stood with purpose, her chair sliding back quietly on the flagstones. Dr. Vance, retired head of Doctors Without Borders, who'd overseen responses in West Africa during the Ebola crisis. She offered a deep, respectful bow. "Dr. Grant," her voice projected like a keynote at a conference. Acknowledgement overdue. It wasn't alone for long. A man in a Navy suit, ex-Nurse Hale, now running a global health NGO, rose next, his bow deliberate and heartfelt, as if paying respects at a memorial. Then a third, a former WHO field coordinator from our joint efforts in Syria. The courtyard, with its manicured borders and twinkling string lights like IV drips in the dark, seemed to pause in unison. Non-medical guests traded confused looks, but even they felt the turn, the air growing heavy with a reverence that eclipsed the earlier mockery. Nora's bridesmaids kept fluttering around her, fanning with cocktail napkins and whispering encouragements, but her eyes remained fixed downward, avoiding mine completely. Eleanor tried to seize control again, moving among the tables with a contrived lightness that bordered on desperation. "Let's not derail the joy," she said, her voice higher and shakier than usual, cracking like a brittle suture. But her efforts fell flat, like a miscalculated dose, ineffective, unnoticed. No one followed her cue anymore. The bows continued in ripples, each one a quiet puncture in the veneer she'd so carefully preserved for years. I stayed planted, taking it all in without a sound. Inside, memories rushed like adrenaline in a code blue, signing on with the relief.org at 22, right out of Boston residency, driven by a calling that family brunches never sparked. Mom called it a fleeting adventure, a defiance of her planned weddings to steady careers, kids in private schools, settled lives in posh areas like Back Bay. Nora, the shining star, copied her with snarky digs about globe-trotting bandager while she chased viral fame and endorsements. Dad, before his sudden aneurysm, was my hidden backer, slipping disaster response articles under the table at awkward dinners, his eyes full of unspoken support. His remembrance 13 years ago was the breaking point. Me in whites, shoved to the sides as they set up photos by the plaque like it was a fundraiser. No mention of my lead role in a typhoon response or the lives I'd pieced back together. Just Eleanor's soft command. "Don't turn this into your story." That quiet had stretched into over a decade, snapped only by this invite, a call laced with caution. Now, as the reception inched on with servers pushing trays no one wanted, I felt a subtle easing. Not conquest, but a reset. Liam stepped away briefly to Nora, who sat with some color back but her spark dulled. He leaned in, saying something I couldn't catch, and she nodded weakly, though her look at me held something fresh, not just bitterness, but a touch of unease, like seeing me clearly for the first time. Back with me, he spoke low. She didn't get the full case history. On Haiti, I kept it under wraps, thought it was better. I raised an eyebrow. Under wraps? That's evasion in our field. He flinched a bit. Good call. But tonight fixes that. The night grew darker under Boston's city glow, stars peaking like distant monitors in a ward. Talks broke apart. Some groups broke down the reveal with excited whispers. Others stuck to safe topics like the chapel's stained glass or the river's history. I dealt with a few approaches, handshakes, shared crisis stories from those in the field. An older gentleman, with a Red Cross pin on his lapel, held my arm. My wife was in the tsunami response, he said. Lost her hearing to an explosion. People like you. They keep the hope alive. His words landed like a successful graft, mending something I'd thought beyond repair. Eleanor circled the edges, her redirects getting weaker. She finally came up as the ensemble played a slow ballad, the dance floor filling slowly with couples. Sophia, she said, mixing beg and blame. You've made your point clear. Maybe talk private tomorrow? Brunch? I stayed quiet, letting the silence weigh. She twisted her hands, pearls like worry beads. Talk spreading guests, even a health blogger heard. Photos going around. A quick fix statement? For the family's image? The nerve almost made me smile. Fix the story you made by leaving me out? My work cut to volunteer for your ease? Her face broke, eyes wet. We weren't ready for everything. Your life seemed so far away. We didn't see the depth. You saw. You chose not to care, I said calmly. Ignoring was the choice. She looked down. It wasn't aimed at you. That's the problem, it should have been. Families aimed. She went still. I didn't wait for sorry that wouldn't come. Turning away, I stopped at the hedge. Eleanor, I've worked through disasters alone half my life for your comfort. That stops tonight. I left, leaving behind the spot never meant for me. In the weeks after, the wedding's effects spread beyond the courtyard. Media bits popped up, local papers on unsung healers in family events. Tips from the reception. I went back to Atlanta, picking up duties with new clarity. But it sparked change. 4 months later, I spoke at a panel in the CDC's big atrium. In plain clothes, no badges, I held the podium and said truths I'd kept inside too long. We have plans for outbreaks. I started, voice strong over the mic. For epidemics, disasters, but what about hurts from our own people? Not from bugs or shakes, but family cuts that go deeper than any knife. The crowd leaned in, mix of docs, policymakers, aid folks. I started the Lifeline Alliance. National help for relief workers hit at home. Partners with orgs and clinics focused on emotional checkups, therapy for lost trust, classes to fix broken ties, help against a loan from sisters, husbands, moms. The biggest hurt sometimes is support breaking, I said. We can't act like those don't count. No names for Nora or Eleanor. Media-filled gaps from wedding leaks, doctor's wedding fight starts new aid group. I let it go, a flow taking the message further. Retirement came easy after no big parties, just handoff and move to a cabin in Vermont's Berkshires, where hills whispered like old team members. Alone brought peace. Mornings drafting surgery steps in bad weather. Afternoons walking trails like checking a big ward, careful steps. Views from tops like looking over a camp. No walls with papers. Instead, easel by window, seeing valleys that showed endless ways. Sometimes visitors locals, volunteers asked about passed over tea. "True, you're a doctor?" one said, eyes big. I smiled. "Chief surgeon, yes." But more, I learned to stay strong in mess. Sharing some, I stressed toughness. The crises that tried. Families that let down. The fare found in quiet stand. In Boston, word came through sideways Eleanor's giving now includes relief worker stuff. Nora's posts quiet, talking my growth. No straight talk, but change you could feel. The pivoting flow reshaped things, put me on better ground. The months following Nora's wedding intertwined into a tapestry of transformations, much like the evolving weather systems I'd monitored during extended deployments in flood-ravaged regions unpredictable on the surface, but guided by underlying currents that revealed themselves with patience and perspective. Retirement didn't arrive as a sudden halt. It was a gradual deceleration, planned with the same meticulous care I'd applied to emergency protocols over the years. After the panel at the CDC, where I'd unveiled the Lifeline Alliance to a room filled with potential partners, I handed over my coordination duties in a low-key ceremony at the organization's Atlanta headquarters. No elaborate farewells or keynote speeches, just a gathering of trusted colleagues, a few handshakes, and a nod to the open road ahead. My deputy, a sharp epidemiologist who'd shadowed me through countless outbreaks, gripped my hand firmly. "The field won't be the same without you, doctor," she said, her voice steady but laced with genuine respect. I offered a faint smile. "It'll adapt. And so will I." Packing up my office felt like archiving a lifetime. Reports on responses from Haiti to Ebola hotspots in Africa, commendations tucked into boxes alongside personal keepsakes, a faded photo of Dad in his volunteer days, a stethoscope from my first field assignment. The move to a cabin in Vermont's Berkshires was deliberate, chosen for its isolation and natural serenity. Far from Boston's bustling harbors or Atlanta's clinical hubs. The cabin I acquired was modest, a wooden structure nestled among maple groves, with a wraparound porch overlooking a serene pond that mirrored the changing seasons like a living diagnostic scan. No grand lodge, just enough space for solitude, with a small studio for drafting and a wood stove that popped like distant thunder on cool evenings. Arriving in early autumn, as leaves burst into fiery reds and oranges, I unpacked methodically, medical texts lined on shelves, my drafting table positioned by the largest window to capture the eastern light. The scrubs hung in the closet, a relic now, their fabric slightly worn from years of service but still holding the echoes of crises past. Life in the Berkshires settled into a rhythm that echoed the calm focus of pre-response briefings. Mornings started with herbal tea on the porch, watching mist lift from the pond as birds called across the water. I resumed drafting with a passion I hadn't felt since medical school. Pencil sketches of field ores amid rubble, landscapes capturing the rolling hills of the Green Mountains, abstract pieces exploring the play of light and shadow in a quarantine tent. It was therapeutic, a way to process the invisible scars no certification could heal. Afternoons often involved hikes along trails that wound through dense forests, my boots crunching on fallen leaves, the air crisp with the scent of earth and pine. These outings mirrored site assessments, calculated steps, panoramic views from ridges where I could survey the terrain like overseeing a mobile clinic. No urgency, no deadlines. Just the freedom to breathe without the weight of leadership. Correspondence began arriving soon after Lifeline's launch, not from family as I might have half hoped in passing moments of optimism, but from supporters across the country. Emails from aid organizations praising the program's focus on internal traumas, letters from field workers sharing stories that paralleled my own disconnects at home that amplified the isolation of deployments. One testimonial stood out, arriving via priority mail from a paramedic in Texas. A young responder disowned by her parents after a burnout confession post, flood relief, finding comfort in Lifeline's therapy sessions. "Your wedding story went viral in our groups," she wrote, her handwriting steady yet earnest. It gave me the strength to rebuild connections. Not all fixed, but I'm not operating alone anymore. I read it by the fireside one evening, flames dancing shadows on the walls, and felt a quiet validation. Lifeline had grown beyond my initial vision, chapters sprouting in major cities like Chicago, San Francisco, and Miami, offering not just counseling but reconciliation workshops, legal support for benefits claims, and peer networks that fostered the camaraderie often lost in non-field life. Media interest continued in waves. Articles tracing my career's path from the heroics of the Haiti earthquake, where my mobile team's precise interventions had pulled Liam's group from the wreckage amid ongoing tremors, to my rise as an advocacy pioneer. Outlets like The Atlantic and Medscape ran features, from field surgeon to frontier advocate. Dr. Grant champions hidden battles at home. I granted a few remote interviews, emphasizing the alliance's core. Relief work doesn't end at the border. The deepest threats can come from our own teams, family dismissals that erode morale like infection in a wound. Lifeline equips us to treat and strengthen. No sensationalism on my part. I avoided personal anecdotes about the wedding, letting public narratives evolve naturally. Nora and Eleanor remained silent figures in this new chapter. No calls, no letters, just echoes through mutual acquaintances. A cousin mentioned at a family event that Eleanor had shifted her philanthropy toward health worker support, hosting fundraisers with a new emphasis on domestic caregivers. Nora's social media, glimpsed once via a neutral search, showed restrained posts, reflections on self-discovery amid travel photos, her bridal shine tempered by introspection. It wasn't reconciliation, but a recalibration, a quiet admission that my presence could no longer be erased. Winter covered the Berkshires with a gentle ferocity, blanketing the landscape in snow that muffled the world like padding in a trauma bay. I adapted seamlessly. Snowshoes for trails, a generator humming reliably during storms, evenings spent reviewing Lifeline updates by lamplight. One blustery afternoon, as flakes swirled like debris in a windstorm, a local farmer named Clara knocked on my door with firewood and supplies. She'd become a semi-regular visitor, drawn by rumors of the retired doctor in the hills. "Heard you're the real thing," she said, shaking snow from her boots on the porch. "Led teams in Haiti?" I invited her in for tea, the cabin warm with the scent of pine and brewing herbs. "Among other places," I confirmed, pouring a mug. But titles fade. It's the standing firm that lasts. We talked for hours, her farm stories echoing my missions, protecting crops from blights, navigating market crises. She shared her own family split, healed late, and asked about mine. I offered glimpses. The wedding's turning point, the vows that shattered illusions, the alliance born from personal upheaval. Justice isn't always a loud apology, I mused, looking at the storm outside the window. Sometimes it's the subtle change in how your name is said, with pause, with measure. As spring melted, the ponds and buds burst on branches, Lifeline's impact deepened. A partnership with the WHO expanded resources. Online portals for anonymous sharing. Mobile units visiting aid hubs to address familial sabotage before it spread. Testimonials poured in, a nurse rebuilding with siblings after years of dismissal, a tech finding closure post-breakup through guided talks. One event stood out. A virtual summit where I moderated panels on endurance. Workers from various orgs recounting home front struggles. Dr. Grant showed that silence isn't defeat, one panelist said, her voice steady over the line. It mirrored my own growth from the overlooked guest at Dad's remembrance to the center of change at Nora's wedding. That low point had become my starting line. The ridicule a trigger, Liam's bow the spark, the wave of recognition the push forward. Family dynamics circled on the edges now, no longer the main pull they'd been. Whispers came: Eleanor joining a Lifeline fundraiser undercover, Nora helping at a local health clinic. No direct reaches, but the recalibration was clear. Respect earned through distance. A quiet fairness where my story stood unedited. In the cabin, amid the sound of summer rain on the roof, I thought about it while drafting a horizon at dawn, endless, free, hands outstretched against the rising sun. Justice, I realized, wasn't in spoken regrets, but in this. Staying strong in horizons I chose, where the only crises were ones I handled by choice. Occasional visitors broke the quiet. Groups of interns from nearby hospitals, seeking advice on hikes. A writer profiling women in global health. Her questions deep but respectful. How do you balance family betrayal with personal success? She asked one afternoon by the pond. Notebook ready. I paused, watching a heron take flight. Balance isn't always shared. Success comes from redrawing your map away from their storms, toward your own calm. She nodded, writing fast, and the article ran in a major journal, spreading Lifeline's reach. As fall came back, painting the hills in bright colors, I hosted a small meeting at the cabin. Lifeline coordinators brainstorming growth international branches for partner orgs, apps for real-time support. Laughter echoed on the porch, plans mapped like response strategies. In the middle, a letter from a surprise source. Liam, postmarked from his new clinic in Seattle. Doctor. It started formal, then softened. Nora and I are finding our own paths. Your alliance inspired us going to sessions, learning to listen. Thanks for the reset. No mention of apologies, but a link offered. I replied short. Open roads ahead, heal well. Winter's return brought reflection, snow covering the world as I drafted by firelight. Nora's wedding, once a hurt, now healed into strength, a reminder that boundless horizons wait for those who claim them. Mom's world, once controlling, faded to a far star. Mine shone bright, hands forever ready.